Oh, hi, Mark. JD's and Lendelman. We have a new Evil Dead movie coming. Um, very soon. This Friday, I think. It might release on Thursday. Who knows? Who cares? Well, you do if you're going to see it on opening night. I'm going to see it on Friday. Friday or Saturday, I'm in there. Uh, Probably Friday. But and I'm thinking maybe I'll review it. But first, maybe I'll just take it as an excuse to talk about all of the Evil Dead movies. So I already did a review of The Evil Dead, the 1981 Evil Dead film, uh, some months ago. I'm not going to revisit that one because I just did that review. But let's just pick up where we left off with Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 came out in 1987, and it was directed by Sam Raimi, and it stars Bruce Campbell. Just in case you're unfamiliar with Evil Dead 2, which none of you are, because Evil Dead 2 is one of the best horror films ever made. Genuinely, it's one of my favorites. Top 20 probably, somewhere in there. I'm not quite sure where. And I suppose I'll just tell you why. There's no reason to leave you in suspense. Now, Evil Dead 2 is a horror comedy. And my favorite thing about Evil Dead 2, and it's the thing that I say about Evil Dead 2 every single time I talk about Evil Dead 2. I don't know if I've ever talked, how many times can I say Evil Dead 2 in a single review? Ooh, rhyming. Anyway, it's what I say every time I talk about the movie, and it is that it is the perfect horror comedy. Now, what I mean by that is not that it's the most it's the most well made, although I think that an argument could be made for that as well. I think this movie is extraordinarily well made, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But what I really mean when I say that is that it is the perfect balance of horror and comedy. There are parts in this movie that are genuinely frightening, and I think the first couple of times I didn't really realize that, because I had been so thrown off by the tone of Evil Dead 2 when I first watched it that I actually didn't like it the first time I tried watching it, which was I was a teenager, and I had seen The Evil Dead 1 when I was a kid, and I was terrified of that movie. And I go to watch Evil Dead 2, and it's this goofy thing. And I just altogether shut it out. The second time, I was also a teenager, I was a bit older, and I thought it was hilarious. But I never really, I don't think it was until a little later in my teenage years, maybe even early adulthood, that I truly appreciated the balancing act this movie does between its horror and its comedy. And I mean, just some examples of that. There is a lot of comedy in this movie, and it's all really funny. We have the hand, the severed hand, running around and causing havoc and flipping him off, and it gets covered by a bucket, and he puts a bunch of books on top of the bucket, and the book on the top is called A Farewell to Arms. We have the laughing scene. We have the just sort of unnatural way that certain of the Deadites move and talk, which can be funny or it can be scary, depending on who you are. And I think, obviously, a lot of that is very subjective. If I saw this movie as a kid, I'd be mortified. But I saw it not as a small child, so I found most of it funny. But going back on rewatch, and I've developed this sort of fear of the uncanny, a lot of this is actually very, very disturbing, very scary. And it does it so well within the context of like two things in the same scene can be two different ways. Yeah, that made sense. Are you still here? Probably not. Who cares? So what I'm saying is, I'll just provide some examples. Like the scene where Ash's girlfriend comes back and she's this claymation ballerina dancer and she's pirouetting out there. And there are a couple of things, like the concept of seeing your dead girlfriend dancing around outside in the woods at night. That's really creepy. And it even looks creepy in the beginning. And then something goofy happens where she takes off her head and it rolls down her arm. I'm pretty sure I'm not misremembering that. And then she like pops it back up. If I misremembered that, I'm sorry. I did not watch this film tonight. I've seen it many times, but it is possible that I got that mixed up with another movie. And then she kind of like does a little pirouette jump at the end of it, and she goes, ah, and she fades away, and that's funny. But that scene started out creepy. Or my favorite example, personally, of the dichotomy of horror and comedy in the whole movie would be the laughing scene, where we have Ash and he's cracking up mentally as well as physically, and he's like laughing, and the stuff around him starts laughing with him. And it starts out really funny, where he's looking at household furniture and it's all laughing with him. And he starts like pumping, like, oh, like he's amused. When the lamp is like hunched over laughing with him. And that's funny stuff. But then the deer head animates on the wall and the eyes are all cloudy and it snaps to the side and you hear all the bones that shouldn't be in a mounted deer head and crack as it's lurching to the side and it starts laughing. That's actually like really troubling imagery. That is actually creepy. And I think that's just what this movie does so well. But on top of all of that, it is just really, really funny too. It's spooky and funny. So that was a very long-winded way of saying that. But that was all just to say, perfect balance of horror and comedy. That is precisely what I mean. Now, on top of that, you have Sam Raimi's excellent camera work. Just incredible. The kind of like POV shots, which literally everyone's said this who's ever talked about a Sam Raimi movie. Just the POV shots zooming through the forest, which I think I remember on the director's commentary of that movie, that they accomplished that with like a motorcycle. And they were riding a motorcycle through the woods and then they started riding it through the house. That's crazy filmmaking. But all of his camera work is excellent. Unfortunately, I will say I don't remember the music a ton in this movie. Some of it I vaguely recall, but I don't remember it as well as I probably ought to. But the pacing of this movie is breakneck. I mean, you have the first Evil Dead movie that's like, it's a little more serious and it takes a little bit to get going. But then Evil Dead 2 comes in and it says, you know what? We don't even, because Evil Dead 2 is effectively a remake of the Evil Dead. It goes, we don't even really need all these extra people. I just want Ash and his girlfriend. And the fuckery shall begin immediately. Let the fuckery commence. And commence the fuckery does. And you just go from incredible scene to incredible scene to incredible scene for the rest of the movie. For the rest of the movie. Now, I will say that it sort of feels like the pacing might take a little bit of a hit when the other characters are introduced, just like a slight hit, not anything too major. Major. I don't know why I elongated it like that, but not anything too crazy. But prior to that scene, I think it may be just because there are so many good scenes before that happens. You have him cutting his hand off with a chainsaw, him replacing his hand with a chainsaw, groovy, which comes from that scene. His fight with his hand, his reflection coming out of the mirror, which is another thing that's very troubling. You just cut up your girlfriend with a chainsaw. Does that sound okay to you? And then he starts strangling him. And then you have the initial possession, the reanimated corpse dancing. I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff that happens prior to the other group getting there, and I feel like that's probably why it feels a bit like it takes a bit of a hit. And I do think that it does kind of blow its load a little early in the crudest terms possible, because I don't think there's anything that reaches the heights after Danny Hicks and the rest of Bill Hicks, Bill, I think it's Danny Hicks. I apologize for not remembering his name because he's not with us anymore, and he was a very entertaining actor. But there's nothing that reaches those high of highs after that point. I will say the rest of the movie is good. It's just not as good. Now, in terms of the characters, I also find them pretty amusing, pretty much all of them. Well, actually, I find all of the male characters amusing, which is kind of strange that the females are very one-dimensional, or maybe it's because I think everyone's pretty one-dimensional in the movie, but maybe it's more of an issue of the actresses portraying them, because they're not as zany. They definitely aren't as out there of characters. You know, you have Ash, who his whole thing is this machismo bravado of I'm gonna fight this evil thing, and I'm gonna do it with a chainsaw in my hand, and I'm gonna drop one-liners while it's happening, and that's obviously a really entertaining character to watch. And then you have Bill Hicks, Danny Hicks. I am sorry, I can't remember his name, but you have his character that is just kind of like the redneck guy, but he gives a good enough, like out there enough, zany enough performance that he's memorable. I just don't think any of the women in this movie give that kind of performance. I'm not a sexist. I just don't. The performances aren't that good. Okay, stop interrogating me. God, are these lights hot to you guys? But so that's unfortunate that they aren't given a whole ton to work with, but it kind of just is what it is at that point. We're all here to see Ash anyway. Realistically, Danny Hicks is just a plus. I'm going to call him Danny because I'm pretty sure his name is Danny Hicks. He's just a plus because, as I said, he's a really fun character actor who I like a lot. But I like him so much that I can't remember his first name. In any case, I think Evil Dead 2 is one of the best horror movies ever made. Easily the best horror comedy ever made. You know what? Yeah, I will assert that. It is the best horror comedy ever made. It is. I don't know if it's my favorite, but it is the best in terms of filmmaking, in terms of balancing horror and comedy. Evil Dead 2 is miles above pretty much every other horror comedy I've seen. Every other horror comedy I have ever seen either leans way too much into horror or way too much into comedy, Or some of them go, I know what we'll do. We'll make it a drama. And I'm looking at you, Unwelcome. Man, fuck that movie. Have you guys seen Unwelcome, the movie about the like lawn no the lawn goblins or whatever the hell? It's like in Europe and it becomes a drama and you're like, dude, I came here to watch a stupid movie about lawn goblins. What is your life right now? But it doesn't matter because this movie's better than Unwelcome. I just had to vent about that for a minute. I didn't even finish that movie. That movie sucked so bad. I was watching it with my fiance, and um, I turned to her like halfway through the movie, and I'm like, "Do you even care to finish this? Because I really don't." And she's like, "Nope, not even a little bit." That movie blows. This movie rocks. I'll catch you guys on the next one.